Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm Tony Lockwood and I'm delighted that you could join me on this latest episode. Each episode takes the form of a discussion with a leader who openly shares their experiences of leading organisations through the transformation journey. Today I'm joined by Helen Eivers, a clinical lead and a licensed partner for Go Mad Thinking. I think you'll enjoy this session as it covers a particular issue that we cover off on most of the sessions: how to manage stress. And Helen will share her own experiences and some ideas of how to overcome stress yourself, but also help other people within your team. So let me introduce you to Helen now. Hi, Helen. Delighted that you've agreed to join me today. Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. It's great to have you here. And we've had lots of people on the show from diverse backgrounds and experiences to date. However, I think today is a first, and I'm excited to get into it and talk about your experience, initially within the NHS and the medical world, and now in your new career focused upon driving cultural change. So, as we always do on these, let's start by asking you to introduce yourself, letting the listeners know a little bit more about your background, and I suppose how you first got involved in the world of sort of change and transformation in the way that you are now.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Tony. So my background is 37 years in healthcare. I started off student nurse, went on to do my midwifery, and then I ended up in Ireland, married an Irish soldier, and when I had my first baby, the local community hospital I went to work in had these nurses dressed in white. So everything was white apart from the shoes. And the next thing, I ended up on an ambulance with a little lunchbox with a few bandages in. So that was quite interesting, off to a road traffic collision. And that's where I first decided I actually like this pre-hospital care, and grew my passion for that element of my career. So I joined the National Ambulance, Irish Ambulance Service, so back in the mid-90s, and then transformed into a paramedic tutor in Dublin in the National Ambulance Service College. And from there, I spent 17 years as a paramedic tutor, and came back to the UK about 10 years ago. Right. So I did a few things, consultant trainer, and then joined an NHS provided service for telephone triage. So that's where I've spent my last 10 years, as a clinical advisor, training manager, and clinical lead.
Interesting. And moving on, I suppose, to what you're doing now, how your last 10 years have developed. And do you want to just explain a little bit more about that and the work that you're doing at the moment? That obviously is pulling from your experiences in that early career, but probably a little bit more aligned to the type of change and transformation that we're talking about generally within this podcast.
Yeah. So when I first started about 10 years ago in this journey through the NHS, I grew as a leader, I suppose. I had been a tutor, so I've been in the educational field, growing people to, develop skills and be the best paramedics they could be. And now I found myself in a setting where I'm used to dealing with patients, but actually now I'm growing as a leader, and I'm finding my feet to see, what type of leader am I really? I suppose the biggest transformation for me was that I was starting to see people develop within the teams that I was building, and found that, that was my passion really. And I suppose building people to be the best they can be really was my purpose there. However, the environment was a challenge, because the environment of the organization was quite stifling and suffocating and controlling. So over that 10 years, I suppose, I found that whilst I transformed myself as a leader, I was battling the challenges along the way, which actually led to my burnout a year ago.
Right. Okay. So go on. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that towards the, so I suppose a year and a half ago, I met, I had the opportunity, my HR director could see that I was longing for, some sort of help and support, because it was literally like banging your head off a wall. And she sent me on a discovery day to the Go Mad Thinking headquarters. And it was almost like, I don't know, it was just really, it might sound quite bizarre, but when you're in an environment where you've been so suffocated for 10 years, and then you're in an environment all of a sudden where around you, people are up getting you to think. And it was so overwhelming that, even walking around the grounds, the calmness, the peace, the relaxation, compared to the madness of firefighting and problem after problem that we've suffered, and it's been quite significant problems that we've had. But that feeling of almost liberation, I could think. And I realized, my God, have I not been thinking for the last 10 years? Or I've been in this stifling environment that actually I've been fighting my people passion, because I'm passionate about people, and I've done the best I can. And then I actually look back and think, my God, I've been so resilient in what I've attempted to do with those constraints around me. But yeah, I found this magic of Go Mad Thinking, and all of a sudden I had a structure, which was for me the most passionate part of that realization that actually there's the missing piece of the puzzle almost, that I'm allowed to think.
It's interesting that you frame that part of your experience by stating that you'd got to a point in your career where you had the stresses had started to take a toll, and we talk about how to manage stress within podcasts or all the shows really, because change and transformation can be very, very stressful for the people that are leading it, but equally the people that are in receiving that change, that uncertainty can create a stressful situation. And I always try to extract from people what they do to mitigate that stress. So in terms of your experience, we've working in the NHS. I can't imagine what it's been like over the last 3 years when we, as we were approaching the pandemic and then getting right into the middle of that. Massive pressures for everyone who were working in that. But in terms of looking back from what you've learned through Go Mad Thinking, what are the sort of top 3 or 4 things that you think that, when you are in that sort of right deep into it in that stressful situation, what are the 3 or 4 real key things that people need to take?
Well, firstly, there needs to be an avenue for you to get all of those stressful thoughts or hindering thoughts out of your head. You need to have an environment where you can share them and not be treated like a robot or a number. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that there are leaders that look at just number driven and will do anything to get the numbers. And actually there's those people where I'm a leader for people and I care about people. So I was busy getting everyone else's hindering thoughts out of their head and solving problems and, driving people forward with a vision. But yet for me, how I was being managed was that my hindering thoughts, I had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, burnout is typically constant chronic stress with a lack of support.
Yeah.
And that for me is the enabler to be able to thrive through the stress period. So we had things like, I mean, I was the face of the organization in a massive coroner's investigation. So I was in the witness box for 4 hours saying how I was going to help prevent this from happening, and the whole nightmare of that situation where, yes, I'm the lead and I'm responsible, but, when we go through these massive stress events within our work, that's where you need the support, because those lasting effects will stay with you forever. And even though you're confident and you're smiling, people think, oh, she's all right, she's okay, she'll get over it. But actually you don't, because you carry that with you, and then you build on top of that. We had the Grenfell fire, so we were literally half a mile away from Grenfell when that happened. So we end up having these massive events, one after the other, and then COVID hit. And I was also working in A&E at the time. I was doing 2 shifts in A&E on my time off to keep my skills up, because as a leader, you want to be able to maintain, to be the expert, obviously, in what you're doing. So I had that stress as well. And then COVID hit. So I think for me, it's about allowing people environments to shed the hindering thoughts, because the great power that I found is actually writing it out, getting them out. People say, they've written a book, and there's a lot of power in writing books about your story, because it's part of the healing journey as well.
Yeah.
But I think that that would be one of the massive things that I would say, that you need to be able to do that, but you need an environment of psychological safety.
Yes.
So you want people to feel they can do that, really.
Yeah. So
and I think that was massive for me.
Sorry, Helen, there's 2 parts to that though, isn't there? Then there's one part is you as a leader creating that environment that your team can take advantage of and utilize as and when they need it. But secondly, you as a individual finding, if your manager or boss isn't providing you that, acknowledging that you need it and then going finding it elsewhere. Yes.
For me, that was the biggest thing. And when you're in it, you can't recognize it, because you're just driven and you're moving for your people in your team, and you're compassionate. I'm compassionate about people, so I want them to be happy and producing and developing, because the biggest thing is getting that development stretch, isn't it? They're doing the what they need to do to get paid, but actually you want them to develop and be that enabler, for that little bit more to succeed and celebrate. I was just suffocated, I think.
No, absolutely. I remember someone telling me, God, years and years and years ago, they started talking about the emotional bank account and the need for obviously keep putting credits into it, and that's taking time away, giving you time to think, writing stuff down, because day-to-day life you're paying out constantly, and a bank account, you're paying out constantly and not putting credits in, you get overdrawn, then you start to get to have negative impacts on that environment, and it's something that image is kept with me for many years. It's just, if you are getting to the point where you're getting into that overdraft, make sure that you do something to break it and give yourself some space.
Yes.
So that was one thing.
Absolutely.
What are a couple of other things that you can take from your experiences over the last few years?
I think for me is that what I've always wanted to do is give people a vision. And one time I actually we had a stall on an emergency services show, And I'm always looking for opportunities to create, I suppose, a drive in the team. And as we were all packing up, there was a little area of the emergency services shows up in Manchester, and it was an empty part where they would have done a lecture. So there was lots of seats, there was a little podium, there was a microphone, and I took a picture of it. And in my head, it was like, I want to give them a vision. I want to give them something to strive for, so we can celebrate, because celebration was never on the table. It was never discussed. There was no measurement of success like I know now in Go Mad. There was none of that language used for me, only the expectation to sort the numbers out and get people performing. So I thought, I'm passionate to get this injected into my team. So I took a picture and I showed it to them in a meeting, and I just said, just imagine you're sitting in the seats. You've got patients, you've got doctors, you've got paramedics, you've got organizations, CEOs coming from all over the country to listen to your show. And you're standing on the podium and your slides are X team. This is what we achieved for patient care in telephone triage. And you're celebrating, you're proud, and I gave them that, as we talk now about visioning in our goals. And I brought them to that podium, which they were never in that hall, but I brought them there and they were buzzing, and it was like, yes, we can do this. Because for years, what I've done is I've got them to think about learning from incidents, learning from audit, and getting them to think about, right, so there's a theme. What could you do to improve that and make sure it doesn't happen again? Oh, we could do this, that, and the other. So they've all done this over the years, but it's almost like that's the top hat, isn't it? It's that telling everyone this is what you're doing and getting it in a newsletter or on a video on YouTube or somewhere to say, that was us.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I always strive to do was do things that I wanted done to me. But because it wasn't coming from the top down, I was delivering it to my team. And there was always this passionate thing trying to get out, but I had nowhere to go, really, which was quite sad. So I think that's a big thing for me, is visioning, is looking to the future.
And it's the same in any transformation, whether it's personal transformation or organizational transformation. It's start with the end in mind. Peter Covey, isn't it? It's those 7 habits.
Yes.
Start with the end in mind, and if you can be really clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve or trying to get to or trying to build, at least you've got that North Star and you can move towards it, and people can buy into it. And equally, some people might say, I don't want to go there, and that's a good enough reason as well, but at least they know that they've got a choice to make, and so you can take people with you. Or in some,
absolutely.
Some people can decide, well, that's not where I want to go. I'll leave now. But having that and being in vocalizing that and communicating that, I think, is a critical element of any successful transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is innovation. So getting people to be creative and think outside the box, so to speak. So before I met Go Mad, I use the term blue sky thinking a lot, and the organization that we worked with that supplied all the software for telephone triage, we did a lot of work with them because they were national. Yeah. And so we were always involved in, creativity almost. But it's very hard if somebody doesn't have that drive to get them to be creative. So again, it's about the environment that they're allowed to work within, to be able to get that innovation out. So I actually created competitions, and I think competitions between teams, say who's going to get the most improved within 30 days. Think about a problem, what's going on in the team, what are you all passionate about, because you need to be able to have the what and the why. So what is it exactly we need to do? Why do we need, how relevant is that? So we had the what and the why, and they came up with the how. And 4 teams created an improvement that made a significant impact within 30 days.
Brilliant.
So that was another way of stimulating some interest around change.
And it's interesting, I think, that you put a 30-day limit on it, because a lot of organizations that I've worked in the past around innovation don't constrain it into, they talk about innovation and they want ideas and they have a competition about creating ideas, but the ones that have been really successful at delivering outcomes, desirable outcomes, have been the ones that have constrained that thinking either into a particular issue or particular area, or, as you've done, a particular time frame. Because everyone can go like this, and it is a big blue sky out there, isn't it? But bringing it down, and what you were doing there is bringing it into, well, what is really achievable, and what can we do in a really short period of time to make a difference? And that really started to drive that sort of those thought processes around short-term areas, don't it? And once you've got that set, then you can widen it and look for longer-term ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was interesting. There was 12 teams, and only 4 teams actually had, I suppose, the motivation or the energy to make that change. So that I thought was interesting in itself, in that controlling environment that we were in, And again, I think if you remove the constraints, you allow people to feel that they can, think for themselves, create ideas and take them forward, which is engaging and empowering people, isn't it? And it's having that culture of, and not being told, no, this is the way it's going to be, and this is what you're going to do by when. And we need to get rid of that, don't we? But
absolutely.
It's a challenge.
I think there's a balance between having the right governance to make sure that people don't start to do things that are going to endanger other people and stuff like that. But you certainly need to encourage that culture of innovation.
Yes.
I've been working with an organisation recently, and if I had £1 for every time I've heard someone say, yeah, but it's different here because it's always happened like this. This is the way we have to do it. In this sector, this is the way we work. All those, and it's like, it's just closed thinking. Let's open it up. And if you're going from A, B, C, D, E in a process, why can't you just go A to E? And when you ask those questions and you start to, and the immediate response is, well, we can't. Well, why? Yeah. It's that sort of 5 whys, isn't it? Let's get right down to the core issue of what's happening. And all too often, it's because in the past someone's decided that wasn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that for me is probably one of the biggest things that I've seen in the last year. When I went to what we call a results accelerated program, and to have the boss in the room giving the enabling yes to say, you present to me in 5 minutes on Wednesday, 2 days later, what it is you want to change, why, and I will open the door for you. And that blew me away. It's like, I've never experienced anything like this before. I was always the one from, I was almost that person being the enabler, but to have an enabler above you, I mean, that's where it starts, isn't it? That's true leadership.
It is, yeah. And a really, really good leader is prepared to accept ideas from other people and support them and not get threatened by them. But all too often, leaders are threatened by people that they believe are better than them. Well, they're going to come and take my role. They're going to come to take my job. It's like, if you're in that environment, it's going to be a challenging environment to operate in. If you are a person like you are, which is always looking for things to do differently and things to do better.
Yeah. And you mentioned about, those people that are, we always did it round here, so that's the way it is. I mean, I was fascinated by one particular person in this group, and he was a community support officer with the police force, and he was coming to retirement age. He sat in the room with his arms folded, you can't teach me anything, kind of, and when you actually got talking to him about the what and the why, he was always the person in the village who was the children would look up to him, the parents who would educate them in the schools about drugs and knives and all the bad things, and all of a sudden it was taken away from him. And at that point then he was thrust out back into the community, but was not engaged in the school, in the classroom. So that had been going on for some time, and anything we used to ask him, he'd say, "Oh, I don't know. I've got long COVID. I've lost my memory. I don't know." Like that personal responsibility element was, I don't know. And then when you actually teased it apart, what is it actually you would like to see changed or improved in your sphere of work? He says, "I'd love to go back to the school. I'd love to get back to the classroom. I see so many of the parents and they're saying to me, why are you not back in the schools?" They all loved him, and that was his passion. So his why was because he was passionate about it. But when he sat in front of the ACC, the chief, the 3 days later, he said, what it is I would like to go back and help in the education of the children, because that is my passion, and I feel that I give so much back to the community, and then I'm fulfilled, And he said, yeah, let's make it happen. And the ACC made it happen, and to see that man walking in on day one and walking out on day three was just, it was rewarding for me, because I'm thinking I've been involved in those conversations with him, and if I can move people from there to there, as part of that conversation, then I could see my future straight away in that self-actualization. In Maslow. Yeah. So Maslow I've used forever, because as an educator, you always want people to be warm, fed, looked after socially in the group. But that self-actualization was always a blur to me. I'm thinking, how do you get there? I've no idea. It's just a word. But then it's almost like when I became a thinking engineer, it's like I'm there. I've actually hit the top of the pyramid. And I think now I know that I could bring people up there through the right conversations. Yeah. And that is the results framework with Go Mad Thinking, because the results framework they are the principles that you are more likely to make a difference if you use them. And we used them with this chap, and it worked.
No, absolutely. And what I picked up on that conversation was you helped him in that case to really understand what his passion was and what his drivers were, and almost elevated him away from the day-to-day activities of what he was being asked to do then. So and identified the gap, and then I suppose helped him to
achieve
to move to be.
But again, the environment was right, so it goes back to the environment. That container was an enabler.
But I think as a leader in a change program, or a leader in business generally, if you can take the time out to really understand your direct reports' passions and what they feel that they can contribute the most, all too often when you do that, they come back with things that you would probably never have expected. And it's illuminating, and by moving, I'm moving my fingers around on video here, but by moving the pieces around in the team and aligning them more to where they feel passionate about, the performance of that team, the performance of the individuals, and then the performance of the team can be exponentially better, can't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a big driver for human factors and psychological safety, because if you can't enable people to raise concerns, raise, errors, I did this wrong, could you listen to that call? Then, it just becomes unsafe, really. And you need that safety, don't you, within that environment to run a safe service. And if you're not in the heads of these people allowing that to happen, then it's not good, really. I mean,
No, absolutely. And like you say, it is giving them the opportunity to learn from the mistakes, and not knocking them down because they've made some mistakes.
Absolutely.
If they constantly make the mistakes, then that's a different thing. You maybe have to give them some training. You maybe have to move them into a different role. But we should encourage people to make mistakes, because then they're pushing the envelope.
Yes.
And by
absolutely.
Sometimes they'll fail, sometimes they'll succeed massively, but they learn from it. They're expanding the zones and then pushing their own envelopes. Then
I had you just brought a vision to me, because I remember one of the people that I developed over the 10 years was a health advisor to begin with. And I never really, until they told me the story a few years later, really appreciated it. But they said, only for you, I wouldn't be here. And this person became a manager of a team of people. So they developed through. And I was always in the background, but I was never really always with that person. But they said, I wouldn't be here only for you. And I said, well, what happened? So I said, well, do you not remember? I failed a call. And, I was going to be sacked. Now, I don't know if that was a perception in her mind, but I would have lost my job. But you stuck up for me and said no, because we have to be allowed to make mistakes so we can learn from them. And then we're going to develop, and only for you. And that person grew from a health advisor into a coach, into a supervisor, and became a manager of a team. And she's now gone on to, she's a second year medical student, and if you had lost that person, you would potentially have lost a doctor. I mean, she might have gone on to be a doctor, but that's the way I look at it. It's getting to that, best practice.
Yeah, I was. It reminded me of a really famous story, and I'm desperately trying to remember who it was, but it was in financial services, and someone had reported that they'd made a significant loss on something, on a deal. And they came into the meeting and said, I'm expecting to get sacked or to get fired or whatever. And the director at the time said, why would I fire you? You've just cost me X millions of pounds, but that's a big lesson for you. You're never going to do that again, are you? Because you know what you did, and so you're never going to make that mistake. So let's just make sure that we put it right. And he then became one of the best traders in the business, because they expected that in sort of that financial services world and trading world, they expect to have losses, because you can't win every time. It's the baseball thing, isn't it? In America, the all-stars of baseball fail something like 70% of the time. But because they hit the home runs on the other 30% of the time, they're all-stars. And it's changing that mindset, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But again, being an enabler to have that bigger picture. And it's very difficult, because I've been reading up on like transactional analysis about, personal responsibility for me is massive, and I still see it to this day. So I still do some agency work. So I still see behaviors, how people are behaving, and trying to understand why they don't take personal responsibility for things that they should be doing as an employee. And then you look at, well, are the leaders acting as parents? And so therefore the employees are behaving like children. And that really struck me, because I can automatically see who the parents are in the room, And of course they're going to behave like children. So we've got to work on, and that stems from obviously how they were treated as a child before, that they behave in that parent mode, or equally how they felt when they were children. That's how they regress to in that situation. But by treating them as an adult, as a leader, and they become an adult as an employee, you work on the here and now, and you're quite objective and, you know, compassionate about their situation. Again, that's a hard sell sometimes to the leaders, because in their heads, well, they're great, aren't they? But I think for me now, working on a culture change within this organization, it's really great for me, because I know the people, I know the types, the stereotypes.
Yeah.
But what I'm excited about now is to see them evolving. And it's interesting because some of them are leaving.
Right.
So it's like, check your response, isn't it? You know, if you don't like it, try and adjust to it. You can't live with it, well, you need to escape, don't you?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what people are doing. So I'm in a really great place now, because I'm almost watching the movie, you know. And I'm playing a part in conversations, because obviously culture change is one conversation at a time, isn't it? But I'm now watching and seeing that actually people are escaping, and it's like, yes, it's just creating the right environment to allow this culture change to take place.
So you're at the moment then, is your focus more on individual change and transformation, or are you working at sort of like the organizational level?
So I'm part of the support really for an organizational change.
Right.
But because I work in the environment as an agency worker at the minute, I'm also there supporting the continuous improvement coach.
Right.
So we can have conversations together to say, well, I've seen this happening, you know, let's think of a goal where we can improve that. So it is really about small conversations. So I actually had a conversation with one of the leaders at the weekend, and he actually came to me with an issue, a people problem. And I gave him, a technique to use in order to get them to extract their hindering thoughts, get it all on paper, do it individually, and then, you know, look at the solution focus thing. Well, how could you possibly help yourself by X? And getting them to be solution focused, and then bringing them together to create some team golden rules. You know, this is how we behave, this is the vision, this is how we're going to get there, and create that environment of, you know, allowing people to say things, because there's almost a context of bullying. You know, there's this thing that rises from time to time, I suppose, with strong individuals, but actually I think there's a bit of a bereavement element here, where if people have had bereavements, they might be angry, and little things might just, you know, but one conversation at a time. And I'm hoping that I can inspire certain leaders within the organization to think about how they approach things, because then they're learning, you know, problem solution, and using the cards, where we've got a great set of cards that we've got 50 of the, you know, common workplace issues, with some solutions on the back. And it's really just educating everyone around the techniques at the moment. And
I think that sort of one conversation at a time message mantra is really powerful. And
Absolutely.
I suppose one of the key elements of that, with when you're engaging with leaders as well, is that explaining what a conversation is, and it's two-way, it's not just one way. You know, break that, just listening and spending more time. What's that, the old adage of you've got two ears in one mouth, using in that order? Is so critical, isn't it, in those conversations, when you are providing that space for people who are in a stressful situation, whether that's bereavement, whether that's just pressure of work, whatever, to open up and just having that opportunity to share what's going on can be so for lots of people. It can unblock a lot of things, can't it?
Yeah. And perception versus reality. Are there things going around their head that they're perceiving to be incorrect, and actually then getting it out on paper is dealing with the reality of it all, and actually, find a way forward.
So that's really good. Thank you very much for that. I think it just we've explored a lot of things that we've in previous episodes we've just covered at a very low level. So that's been really useful. If there's one thing that you look to take into all your interactions with organizations or with individuals, what is that? Is it that one conversation at a time mantra, or is there something else that should be the takeaway from this episode?
For me, because of my journey and the thing that constrained me the most, because I think I could have got to self-actualization a bit sooner,
Right.
is the environment, and having the psychological safety and being an enabler for being the best you can be.
Right.
And when you open that environment, like having the ACC chief in the room to say, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, that's not a problem. And being able to do it, rather than feeling constraint, because those perceptions in your own head, because I didn't have that way out, or able to recognize stress, if you like, it led to my burnout. And I think that if I had that support and that environment was the right environment, but then again, I might not have met Go Mad Thinking, you see.
I think
So things happen for a reason.
Yeah, it's a sliding doors moment, isn't it? And
it is
something. Everything happens for a reason. Just going back to the point around you've mentioned it a couple of times, the getting the ACC in the room, who was saying yes, we can do things differently. What did you do to get the ACC to that point? Was that the natural scale to say, yeah, that's how I want to operate? Or did you have to educate? Did you bring them, he or she, on that journey to get them to that point?
It's a great question. Yeah, I actually met him in a Go Mad Thinking program.
Right.
So he had completed the same training that I had,
right.
and he had this vision of creating great things within the service. In need of improvements. So I suppose you'd have to ask him that question in a way, but he was certainly on the same level of being in love with Go Mad Thinking,
right.
and just seeing the things that it did for him that he could now do for his organization.
Right. And are you now with Go Mad Thinking? Are you a trainer, or are you a consultant in Go Mad Thinking, or
I'm a licensed partner?
You believe in it?
Yeah, I'm a licensed partner with Go Mad Thinking. So I am creating my own workshops. My passion is to be able to speak to as many leaders and get them all into the ACC head of delivering, because the more leaders that you can give them the experience of Go Mad Thinking and how having thinking time in their week will benefit their teams, the more you can spread that through diffusion of conversations, the more organizations are going to be enabling the right environments for growth. But obviously burnout is so significant in the NHS that I see some services are creating their own coaches. So their sisters, their matrons are now coaches. But I don't know. I just want to see that people are having the right conversations in their teams. And I'm already seeing change. I mean, already seeing certain organisations that I'm working with, falling in love with it.
Brilliant. So if listeners wanted to find out a little bit more about Go Mad Thinking, what's the best way of doing that?
They can contact me on helen.eivers, EIVERS, at gomadthinking.com, or go to the website Go Mad Thinking. And there are lots of testimonials there about NHS services and other organisations that have used the thinking methodology in order to create the changes that they want to see.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Helen. Hopefully,
thank you.
The listeners have enjoyed the stories that you've told, the approaches that you've adopted, and the successes that you've shared. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Helen. Great session, as I was expecting it to be. I think your personal experience and your openness to the lessons and learnings that you've taken on board during the last few years were very insightful, and I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot of benefit from this episode. So once again, thank you very much. I trust that you found this episode of interest. If you have, please do share your comments, and please do subscribe and share your thoughts on the podcast as a whole, so that we can spread the word and get the message out to as many people as possible. The podcast goes hand in hand with the approach that we take within the Transformation Leaders Hub, a community focused exclusively on those operating within change and transformation. So if you've not checked it out as yet, please do so today by clicking on the link in the show notes. I look forward to sharing another episode with you in a couple of weeks' time. So bye for now.